Hi everyone. We're just admitting everyone into the room. It is so lovely to have lots of you here today. Thank you all for making it. I know some of you might just be finishing work or wherever you are in the world. Um, whether it's morning, afternoon, evening, we're just very grateful to have you all here. So I'll just wait a couple of minutes while I start to admit everyone. We have a lot more people joining us slowly. Just to introduce myself, I'm Fiona and I'm the Community Growth Coordinator at Teacher Horizons. And I'm joined here today by Kavi, who is my colleague and he's the Director of Community Growth. And we're both very, very excited for this webinar, especially for me having been a primary school teacher. I can't wait to hear about this. And I'm so excited that you get to hear from Awesomenicity because they really are amazing. And they are such a lovely group. We will hand over in a moment. But before we do have a little prompt on the screen, which you might be able to see. And just to get things started, we would love for you to have a think about who was your most memorable teacher and why. So you can start to answer this in the chat box. Don't be afraid to share your experiences. We just want to know what made this teacher stand out for you. Maybe they inspired you to get into teaching. So please feel free to share your ideas. And just a reminder as well that we really like having everyone having their cameras on so that we all feel like we're more involved and there's a community. But please make sure that you keep yourselves on mute. You will have a chance to unmute yourselves eventually and have a little chat, but for now, please just make sure that you keep yourselves muted. So for those of you that are just coming in now, we are just having a little think about who your most memorable teacher was and why. So you can share these in the chat box. Maybe, Kavi, can you start us off, maybe inspire us? I know I've heard of a teacher that inspired you. Who would you say was
Yeah,
that?
I was actually just chat typing on chat, but I can also share. So my eighth grade English teacher, I always like was definitely the most memorable for me because I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do in class, and I was writing a poem. It was literally the first poem that I've ever written in my life. So instead of like reprimanding me or being like, "Oh, you're not doing what you're supposed to do," she took interest in my poem and gave me some feedback, and it encouraged me to write more poetry in her class. But of course, in the end, she did remind me that, you should do this when you finish the task that you have. But just the fact that she was so calm and encouraging, and since then, I wrote a lot more poems and discovered my love for just literature and yeah, short stories and creative writing in general. Well, we have some other stories coming in as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. So we have, for example, one sixth grade teacher, Mr. Knight, first male teacher for this member, but constantly challenged us and pushed me to do better. So that's something really important as well. You want your teacher to really push you to achieve your full potential. Thank you so much for sharing that. We have a Mrs. Gilmore who made homemade pasta and let us write on the windows and walls, which sounds so much fun. So yeah, teachers that think a little bit outside of the box and don't just stick to a lesson plan, maybe do more fun activities. That's also very inspiring. Um, we've got quite a few coming in now. So teacher who was strict but also funny, super attentive. So maybe knowing how to find the balance is very important as a teacher as well. Well, okay, we've got quite a few. So we also have a middle school physics teacher who generally cared about us and took time to get to know us. That's lovely. I think we can all agree that teachers that really take the time to get to know each student individually are the ones that stand out and we really remember them. And let's just have one more here. So we have a Brazilian Portuguese teacher who was impactful on this member's life because she had deep knowledge about her content and could give insightful feedback. So really amazing teachers who are passionate, and you can tell that they are very passionate about what they're doing. And just carrying on from this, we have three very passionate educators in this chat, and they will be leading our webinar today. So thank you so much, Awesomenicity, for joining us. And I will pass along to you guys now so you can introduce yourselves. Thank you so much to everyone who joined in the chat.
Thanks so much, Fiona. I just want to say I don't see the slides, but I'm just going to talk through it and hoping the right slides are showing. So we are Team Awesomenessity. It's so great to be here. We're here together with Caitlin, who's sitting in Australia right now, and Hannah, who is sitting in El Salvador, and myself, Eloise, who is in Mozambique. And we all are passionate educators who met in the warm heart of Africa in Malawi. And the one thing that really brought us together is our shared passion for math and the belief that all students can thrive in the classroom. And together with that dream in mind, we created a math learning platform called Awesomenessity. And since then, we had the huge privilege to work with educators from all around the world to share our passion. So today, being here with everybody is really wonderful. So the agenda for today, what we're going to do, we're going to really think about, how can we make the math learning classroom an inclusive classroom for everybody? And we're going to look at what are learning barriers and introduce a strategy called the C strategy, looking at scaffolding, student engagement, and agency. And then we're going to have a chance to work in breakout spaces so you can actually get involved in some really great conversations about how to make math engaging for everybody. And then we have moments where we can share and reflect. And at the end, we have some Q&A time for any questions that you might have. So we hope you enjoy. So thinking about the math classroom, right? Like I think as educators, we are faced with like a classroom full of students that are unique and special in their own way. And they all come from different backgrounds, often from different schools. They all have different understandings. And this idea, I know when we talk to educators and we're in classrooms, we feel like this challenge of like, how do I support all those learners? I can truly not design 15 different lessons for all my 15 learners. How can I actually make sure I support them? So today we want to look at strategies on how to support all learners despite all the different needs. So the one way is really this idea of like being reactive versus proactive. Often as educators, we plan a lesson and we have this big idea in mind where we want to go. And then we see how students, if they understand the concept, if they ask questions, if they are with us. And then sometimes when we feel like not every students understand it, then we're reactive. And this is where maybe we differentiate our instructions. What we want to talk about today is a little bit more about like, can we, when we plan our lessons, actually think of certain learning barriers that might come up and be proactive in our planning. So looking at certain barriers that might come up and might be a challenge for some students, and then think, what can we put in place to actually tackle those barriers and make the classroom inclusive and accessible for all. So we're really going to talk about how do we break down those barriers, like this little cat's doing his karate. We're going to be like karate educators, breaking down those barriers of learning and making classroom flexible learning environments for everybody. So when we look at the barriers, there are really 4 big barriers that we're going to keep in mind. So the first barrier is the cognitive barrier, which means it's this idea of like, a student doesn't get a certain concept because maybe they are not there yet. It's all new to them and they just feel blocked. So when the student can't connect to this concept, then all the other barriers are also going to come up. All of a sudden I feel nervous. I don't know what to say. And it's just really, really confusing for me. So having this barrier can impact all the other barriers. Then we have the emotional barrier. So the emotional barrier is exactly what we just talked about, this idea of like a student feels anxious, they see numbers and they're already blocked down. They feel like the environment that either I know the answer and I can't fail, and then they are really nervous, or they already labeled themselves about like, I'm bad, I'm part of this bad math club and I just don't get it. So the emotional barrier, if we have this, nothing is going to happen. And then we have physical barriers. And physical barriers is really this idea of like when we present students with math assignments, maybe they look at a worksheet, for example, and the font is really small. There's a lot of numbers on it. They feel like it's cluttered. They don't have manipulatives available. They're just asked to solve a certain worksheet and they just feel like, I just can't do it. It could also be like maybe they're sitting alone at their table and they feel like, I can't collaborate. I can't ask questions. And that physical barrier will hinder their learning. And then the last one are the social barriers. This idea that, students don't feel like they belong in the classroom. Maybe I'm feeling awkward as a student. I maybe didn't get along with all of my peers. Maybe I'm worried to being judged. And so I'm just going to be staying quiet so nobody can judge me. And that also affects the learning. And all those barriers can really affect the executive functioning overall. Students' capability to organize themselves, to self-manage, themselves, organize their thoughts, understanding what are the steps that I need to take in order to be successful. So it's really important that we look at all those barriers in order to make sure that students then can also be successful when they organize themselves, when they start learning. So really, when you think about the barriers, it's like, how do we remove those barriers to make the classroom accessible for all? And we love that picture of the sidewalk curve. This idea of like, what is good for one could be good for all. If you put in a strategy that could help one learner who's maybe more of a visual learner, that strategy could also help someone who maybe never used that strategy before, but would really benefit from them. So looking at the sidewalk curve, it's really good for people in a wheelchair, for example, but it's just as good for the person who's pushing their bike or a stroller or a luggage. So we want to give you the tools today to build that curve in your classroom to make learning accessible for all. So we're going to show you a short movie with different learners talking about who they are. And while you're watching, we just want to ask you what comes to your mind while watching that movie.
Dear teacher, I know it doesn't always seem like it, but I really do want to listen and learn.
It's just my brain is kind of different. So this is what I'd like you to know about me. I have to move, or I really can't pay attention.
Even though I'm not looking at you, I can still listen to what you're saying.
If you tell me, sit up straight, now I have to use all of my brain to do just that.
It makes me feel sad when you tell me to try harder, even though I've already tried as hard as I can.
I actually listen better when I'm rocking in my chair. When you give me a bunch of directions, I start to think I will never remember all of this. Sometimes my mom or dad ends up doing all of my homework. So here's how you could maybe help. Let me get up and move while I'm learning.
Let me look wherever I want when you talk to me.
Let me rock or slouch in my chair.
No matter what, please don't take away my recess. Give me help I could do all by myself. Make directions very short.
Just ask me, what does your brain need right now?
And one more thing. My brain might be different than yours, but it's still amazing.
Sincerely, your student.
Your student.
Your student. Your student.
All right. So we're always touched watching that movie. We used it many times, but it's so sweet seeing all those students. So we wonder if you want to put in the chat or maybe unmute yourself and just say quickly what comes to your mind when watching that video. What do you feel and what did you think of?
So we already have some responses in chat. There's learners' needs, different types of learners and how they learn. It's so important to listen to children, different students, different needs. That's what we have so far.
Mm-hmm.
It's refreshing to hear what children think. Yeah, definitely. Learners' needs and listen to students, different learning styles.
Mm-hmm.
We also have some more keywords coming in. We have balance, awareness. We have same goal, but learners are different. perhaps we have one teacher here that it might make them feel a little bit guilty because they do so much of what they're asked not to do, but at the same time, it's can be a little bit complex with managing behavior as well. So it's again trying to find that balance, needing open, being open to different ways of learning and knowing that every child is different. And again, just being able to know each child individually.
I was definitely the child who I would definitely be looking out the window or just moving a bit and look like not paying attention. And I literally had teachers before leaving that class to go to next class asking me, so what did we learn today? And then I was able to explain everything we learned today. And they were so surprised, like their mouths were open. So that was
Yeah.
definitely, and of course, I grew up in India with like 40 kids in one class where the discipline and it was very traditional classroom management. So it reminded me of those days.
Thanks, Kavi. And I think, this idea of like every learner is different. I think we're aware of it. And I know sometimes we have this feeling of guilt, but I think just knowing that we always try our best. And I think today we're going to give you some strategies, not to make you feel guilty, but more to understand, like, you being here already is the first step and you're trying one strategy at a time. We don't all have to nail everything at the same time, but this idea of like, we're trying our very best, but also the focus on the students, that it's really important to listen to them. We're going to talk about this quite a bit. Thank you.
Dear
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time exploring the different barriers that students face, and when we made our lessons with Awesomeness, we really tried to have them at the removing those barriers and making our lessons as inclusive as possible at the forefront. And while we were doing that, we ended up coming up with this acronym or strategy called the C strategy. So it just highlights three kind of key areas where small changes can make quite a big difference in the classroom. So that's scaffold, engage, and agency. So what we're going to do today, we're going to go through each of those different areas, and we're all going to work together. We've got a rounding worksheet that's quite simple and basic. And what we're going to do is we're going to break up into breakout spaces, and we'll be working through scaffolding, improving the engagement and the agency, and in creating a more inclusive activity by the end, hopefully.
So why is it so important to focus on the principle of scaffolding? So looking at those big four barriers we talked about at the beginning, when we think of the cognitive barrier, it's really how can we break down tasks in a way that students feel like, okay, every step is very manageable and I can actually organize my thought and make my way through that complex task. So that's like thinking about the cognitive barriers. The other one is as soon as we scaffold, then we can build confidence in students because now they know the task, they see the different steps, and it reduces automatically their anxiety. So we took care of the emotional barrier. Now imagine if you have a worksheet like Caitlin just talked about, and we actually provide visual aids, any kind of manipulatives you have, or any other access to tools that students can use. So now students can get up, they can get the manipulatives, they can visualize their thinking, which removes the physical barrier. And then this idea of like, we learn so much better when we actually learn together. So the importance of collaboration, instead of doing my worksheet all by myself, can I maybe sit with another friend? Can we talk through the learning together? And can I get support and ask questions? So if we create an environment in our classroom where students, let's take a risk and making mistakes is okay. And I can ask questions to one of my peers or my teacher would remove that social barrier.
So we're going to talk about things that you can do in your classroom straight away to help with scaffolding to support. So one thing that we like to talk about is having a toolbox of goodies. And this could just be an area in your classroom, or it could be an actual toolbox. And the idea is this is the go-to place for students for when they want to get manipulatives or anything that might be able to help them with a certain task. So in a toolbox, you might find hundreds charts, you might find place value blocks or Numicon, empty number lines. And then if your students are learning new strategies, it might be helpful just to have a piece of paper with a breakdown of the strategy steps, with the idea that perhaps your students can say, oh, I want to try to use jump strategy, but I can't quite remember how to do it. They have the choice to go over to your toolbox of goodies, pick up the steps, and then they have a reminder. So that's one way, an easy way that you can incorporate scaffolding into your classroom. Another thing you could do is using the sorry, go
Hannah,
Katie.
sorry, just to piggyback off that. It's not something that you have to create overnight as well. So say, for example, for one lesson, you used 100 charts, you could laminate them and add them to your toolbox. And it's something you could build up over time.
Exactly. And then once you've used it a few times in the classroom, the idea is that students are then confident to go, oh, I need an empty number line. I'm going to go get one and I can use it. Something else you can use is the CPA approach. So that means using concrete examples of whatever concept or topic you are working on, and then moving on to pictorial examples and then to abstract. So here we've got some pictorial examples of tens frame, and then we've got some equivalent fractions tape diagrams. And the idea is that students have a concrete idea or example of what you're working on. They then can move on to a pictorial example, and then the abstract would be bringing in numbers or perhaps word problems and equations. And this isn't kind of step 1, step 2, step 3. The idea of using concrete, pictorial, and abstract is that you can move from one to the other, but then also you can move backwards. So let's say you've got a number sentence and your students just don't know what to do. You can go back to a concrete example of what that number sentence actually looks like. And just thinking about that when you're designing tasks, do I have a concrete example that students can refer to? And then you could move on to pictorial and abstract. And then one of the way that you can support is we've just called these little extras. So that might be a checklist to help students remember the steps for something. So here we have a checklist to remind students of how to round on a number line. And then we have success criteria. So these might be written on the board visually for students to see, or you might be saying them to your students. And the idea with these is that students know how to be successful. They've got examples they can refer to of how they can be successful in a task. So by using all of these, they are hopefully creating that curve to where you might be designing these for particular students in mind, but they might be also helping other students in your class.
Sorry, I was just reading that comment. That's a great one. So using concrete materials throughout their school life would be helpful, but deemed not suitable. And it's so true that in many situations, you know, you hit year 2 or grade 2 and it's kind of like manipulatives are done for you. Whereas it's something that those concrete examples are so important in maths, they should continue throughout your learning. So now what we're going to do is we're going to break up into our breakout spaces. And we're going to be looking at scaffolding. So this is the rounding worksheet that I spoke about before. So it has a column on the left that's rounding to the nearest 10, a column on the right that's rounding to the nearest 100, and it's kind of your stock standard rounding practice. And what we want you to do when you break into your groups is to discuss how you could use scaffolding to power up this activity. We're going to get into engagement and agency later. So at the moment, we're just focused on scaffolding. In the chat, we are going to drop a link to a Google slide. Within that slide, there are many slides in there and they're labeled group 1, group 2, group 3. You can use one of those slides. Hopefully they could match up with your breakout space numbers. If they don't, just grab a free slide and you can enter any notes or information into there, and we can send this out to everyone after the workshop. In the interest of making it inclusive, if you don't work well using a table like that and you'd prefer just to take notes or prefer just to discuss, then feel free just to leave the table as well. So however your group wants to go about discussing how we could provide more scaffolding to power up this activity.
Caitlin, do you
So are
have
we good
any,
to,
sorry, I was
sorry,
just going to
Fiona, go
ask, do you
ahead.
have any preference for how many people in each group?
Not particularly, no. No, you guys go ahead for time purposes.
Okay.
Yeah, I've already created them. There's going to be 4 groups. I think usually in these platforms, it's a little bit more people is better than less. Just
Okay.
depends on who's available to contribute. So there's 4 rooms. And one thing I wanted to mention before I open the rooms is please click on this link first because it will disappear from the chat once you enter the rooms. So if everyone could click on the link to these slides right now, I'll give everyone another few seconds. And then we're ready to open the room. Can we go ahead and do that, presenters? Great.
Yep, go for it. You can go to the next slide too, just for fun purposes.
Okay, so I'll let you go to the next slide and then open the rooms. Fiona, is that already the next slide? Or did you mean a different slide? Oh, that one. Okay.
That was it. Okay, now we can break out.
Okay. All right, I'm opening the rooms now.
It's a great slide.
The rooms are open, so everyone should be joining now.
Would anyone else like to share?
Hi, I was in group 3. We had a mixed we had a mixture of teachers. Not all teachers in there were math teachers. So we couldn't, when group 3, so we couldn't really look at it on the math perspective on its own. So we just shared a general overview of what you can do in a classroom with learners. So we shared something like you could use different manipulatives or different graphic organizers to share. And it's always important to solicit prior knowledge for the students before you start the learning. And looking at the 8 different ages of students in your classroom, those are the things you can put into consideration.
Great, and everything that we've talked about, it can be translated into other subjects. It doesn't, even though we're looking at it through a maths lens, you can use scaffolding anywhere within your teaching day.
Mm-hmm.
Hannah, there's also a sharing in chat as well by Huma. I don't know if you see it or if I should read it.
Let's see.
Yeah, so
go for it.
You go ahead.
So I can see it says when to round up and when to round down, and also place value is really important. So place value is that concrete example of understanding where a number is on a number line so that they can then physically move to a particular multiple.
Yeah, and that's where your place value blocks could be another really helpful manipulative. Even though you're not technically working with the place value system, you're still using it in another context. Alrighty. So this is just an example of a slide taken from one of our lessons. It's an example of how scaffolding can be used to both support and challenge students. So like Hannah mentioned before, we would still have obviously our little toolbox of manipulatives that students can access. Earlier on in this slide, we have a lot of concrete and pictorial examples, but this particular slide is using a top tips or a checklist to help students that haven't yet got that automaticity of the steps of rounding. So like that student who was in the video earlier when she said, when you tell me a lot of instructions, I need you to slow down. Sorry, I'm fostering a cat at the moment who's decided to join us. Like the student who had trouble remembering a lot of instructions, they then have access to something that can help them organize their thinking within the input or the delivery of the lesson. And on top of that, to challenge, we have got it challenges. So We developed Got It challenges as a way to push students further into their learning, but also to give all students time to finish a task. So for example, on this slide, students are being asked, how could they round 546 to the nearest 100? So your early finishers that are like, got it, I know, you can push them back into the learning, and you're asking them, what other numbers could you make from the digits 4, 5, and 6? And can you round them to the nearest 100? So it's a little bit of an open-ended task that then allows that time for everyone in the classroom to feel successful.
And then other things you can use for support are providing students with recording logs. So they don't have to make them on their whiteboards or in their books, but you have them to give. So students who might need help with organization have automatically, they don't need to worry about that. They can just get on with whatever the task is that you're doing. And then we also have, this is an example of something that could go in your toolbox of goodies, perhaps a laminated number line. And the idea is that students then can take it and they can use it to help them round, in our example, rounding numbers. So having a template that students can use again and again, or they can refer back to help scaffold their learning.
Another way we can scaffold is by providing low floor, high ceiling tasks, so open-ended questions. They provide students with multiple access points, so you could stay just in kind of the base question, or you could challenge yourself with extra problem solving. And this is just another example of a low floor, high ceiling task. We use them a lot for starters because they're great for students to really get them to try out different strategies, to get used to trying things and failing, discussing strategies with their peers, and using flexible thinking and multiple ways to go about tasks. Alrighty, so we're up to the E, engage.
So we're going to talk about, like, why is it so important to focus on the principle of engagement? And I think somebody in the chat said before, it's really important to connect to students' prior knowledge, understanding what they actually know, because then when they can do this, they feel like, okay, this is meaningful, I feel good about it, and I know from where I have to start off. So designing different activities for the students is really going to be important, because everybody has a different level when they enter a math lesson. I think, as soon as engagement is up, we feel much more motivated, our anxiety reduces, we remove the emotional barrier. Thinking of the physical barriers, we talked a lot about, like, using manipulatives before. So if you make different materials accessible for all learners, that they are encouraged to actually be active and show their thinking, talk about their thinking, that can really also help with any task that we give them. And then again, like we're going to talk about this a lot, but working in collaboration with others, building a sense of community, like math is fun. It's a challenge we can share together, but also we all have different ways. There's not just one right way of solving a challenge, and building that sense of respect and community is another way that we can focus on engagement. So let's see how we can do that.
So in the classroom, we encourage you to think about multimodal learning. So for those students that always want to be moving, how can you proactively think about bringing movement into your lessons? So that might be as simple as rolling dice. Instead of having a worksheet with number sentences, I could roll dice or flip over playing cards to make my number sentences. And immediately I brought a little bit of movement in, which can increase engagement. And we've got the volume sign there just to think about using different materials or ways to present a topic. So you might have a video, perhaps you have an audio clip to increase students' engagement. And then we always love chalk because it's exciting to use, but also when students are perhaps working outside or in a space with chalk, people might wander by and then they might ask the students questions, and students kind of get a bit of ownership of their learning and are happy to talk about what they've been doing. So thinking about how you can bring a little bit of movement into your lessons. Another way to increase engagement is how can you transform whatever you're doing into a game? This not only increases collaboration, but it also builds on soft skills between students. And it also asks them to apply their understanding. And it creates a richer discourse. If I'm working with Eloise as a team, we might have conversations. What if we tried this? What if we did that? Whereas if I'm working on my own, I might not perhaps have those conversations. So thinking about, is this an opportunity, whatever topic that you're working on, is there an opportunity to transform it into a game? And games don't have to be competitive. They can be tweaked and designed to be collaborative. And the more you kind of practice doing that, the easier it becomes to think about how you can make a game collaborative. If competition is not your bag. And then another way to increase engagement is knowing your students. What interests your students? So if I've got students that are football mad, instead of just giving them numbers to round, I might give football jerseys with numbers on them. I might make up the numbers because perhaps I want students to work with bigger numbers, but just by bringing in that interest, I'm trying to create more engagement with my students.
All right. So what we might do for the interest of times, I think we'll jump back into our breakout spaces, and we'll work on engagement. So you can keep the rounding practice worksheet and you could add to it to make it more engaging, or you could throw the idea out completely and come up with your own activity. We have made the sheet editable now, so you can take notes if you wish. So let's jump into the breakout spaces and see how we can power up the activity with some more engagement in mind.
Great. So I will open the rooms in a few seconds. Again, if you haven't opened the document, we just posted it again. You could open it before we get into the breakout rooms. The rooms will stay the same. So Hannah, you'll be in room 1 this time. And hopefully
Perfect.
that will help. So then, yeah, then the 3 of you are spread out. Okay, I'm opening the rooms now. Done.
One slideshow in the delivery of the lesson. And so this is just, it looks complicated, but it's a very simple way to turn rounding into a game. So students would flip over 4 cards. In this case, they're rounding to the nearest 1,000, but they would make their 4-digit number, they would round it, and then it's called eggs in a basket. They're trying to grab one of the eggs that has their rounded amount on and fill up their basket with eggs. And this can be done in the classroom in very simple ways, like you could get post-it notes and the students could make their own rounded amounts and put them in a square on the table, and they could even splat them or make a cool noise and get them off. And it's just a kind of a quick way to add a little bit of kinesthetic movement, collaboration, and an element of kind of surprise and chance that makes it a little bit more engaging than a traditional worksheet. All right. And on that note, we'll head into agency. So our final area that we're looking at today.
And agency is all about, like, giving the students some choice and listen to what they need. And in the beginning talked about listening to students so they know best what they need. So when you think of the cognitive barriers, as soon as you give students choice what they want to do, they probably enter where they feel comfortable. So and then that helps them with the organization of task, and then with this whole idea of, like, what do I need to do next? With this, automatically I feel more motivated. I chose something that's actually good for me, and I also know, like, I'm in an environment, like, thinking about the physical barriers where I can actually make mistakes, but I chose my path. So it's really important then also to give students this idea of, like, how do you want to get there? Do we want to use manipulatives? I know in our breakout space we talked about how you can introduce one activity after another, and over the course of a week there are a lot of different strategies for the students to use. So this is all about the physical barriers. And then again, just repeating it one more time, this idea of, like, learning with others is really powerful, and giving students that choice of, like, do you want to do it by yourself, in a small group, or with a partner?
And so we've kind of provided a checklist for you to think about when you're designing lessons. Have you incorporated choice and voice? So do your students have access to manipulatives? That means, does everyone have access to them? Do the tasks have more than one entry point? If I'm a student who's developing my understanding of rounding, can I access the task? And then on the other side of the scale, if I'm a student who's really confident with rounding two-digit numbers, do I have opportunity for challenge? So thinking about entry points, do students have opportunities to feel successful, but then also feel challenged? And then is there opportunity for students to collaborate, share ideas, and learn from each other? Sometimes we don't realize the power of, if I hear how Eloise did it, next time, oh, I'm going to try Eloise's strategy. So the power of sharing ideas and working with each other. So this is kind of a checklist to think about when you're designing your lessons and your activities.
So rather than going into the breakout space, we might skip this slide. And if anyone would like to share their ideas or how they provide agency in their classroom, it doesn't necessarily have to be in relation to this particular topic, but perhaps, yeah, how you encourage agency in your classroom in general.
Or you could write in the chat.
Yes.
It's scary when we're in a big group.
Yeah.
Well, I was part of a group 3, and a lot of people were sharing some great ideas. So, not sure if anyone from group 3 would like to start or have ideas with specifically with agency. You can either write on chat or unmute yourself.
What we could do is we could show our examples, and then if anyone wants to jump in and share their top tips, that might be the best way to do it.
That's probably a good idea for time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I go for it? From group
Oh,
3.
yes.
Yeah. Sometimes what I allow to do, because I'm an English teacher, subject teacher, so I allow kids to like choose the way they want to present their work. It's not like if we're doing presentation, if we're doing like if they're writing a story, so to say, I would ask the kids, do you want to make it in form of a comic? Do you want to write it as in different paragraphs? How do you want to present your work at the end of the day? So that is one way of giving student agency.
Yeah, that's excellent. Like providing students different ways to express their knowledge and their learning is an excellent way to provide agency in the class.
I think if it's part of the project, do a menu of ideas and stuff, and or like a bingo sheet, or I don't know, like a graph, and like lots of different ways of representing their knowledge, and they can choose that, or if it's smaller, yeah. And then if it's a smaller one, doing like a mild, medium, spicy challenge, and just go through the students' clear expectations of each, and then they can choose. And I find that they often do choose ones that are at their level. And if not, I just have a quick conversation with them and a little reflection, and then, be like, oh, why don't you try a little mild one? And if you can answer 2 of the questions, that shows me that you're ready to try medium.
Yeah. That's a great segue into our next slide. So yeah, so providing those layers of differentiation in the classroom, and differentiation can be time consuming and it can be tricky. So providing what you can and giving students their voice and choice in the classroom. So in our lessons, we always have 3 base levels of differentiation. So we have sunlight zone, which is you're not quite up to the objective, but you're still accessing it and you have extra scaffolding to help you get there. Twilight zone, you're kind of meeting those expectations and meeting the objective. And then midnight zone, rather than just having like a bigger amount, we try to apply like a little bit of an extra problem solving layer, or where students have to apply their critical thinking a little bit more. So by kind of labeling your differentiation, you can allow students to have the agency to move between them. You might not be feeling confident with one particular topic as a student, and you say, okay, I'm just going to stay in the shallows in sunlight zone today, or I'm really feeling confident about division today. I'm going to have a go at twilight or midnight zone. So just giving them kind of the vocabulary and the process to be able to choose and move between more or less challenging activities.
And one of the things that we do is we have different levels of challenge. So some people might use a must, a should, and a could. We have a challenge level that everyone is going to try to do. We have an excellence level if you want to push yourself a little bit further. And then we have a legend level, which is for students who really want to go deeper into their learning. And in this example on the screen, this is a game activity. And the legend level brings in tactics and strategy. So getting students to go a little bit further in their learning. And the idea of these levels is regardless of whether I try a sunlight task, which is a slightly easier task, I can still challenge myself by trying to challenge an excellence or a legend task. So regardless of what level you're at, you can still find challenge within the activity that you're doing. So that's one way that we try to incorporate agency into our lessons. And I know that we're on the hour, but we've just got a final slide just to recap everything we talked about.
That's right. So about the big five, so this big idea of like being proactive and thinking what kind of barriers can we actually anticipate and remove in order to make learning accessible for everybody. And then thinking about the C strategy, the scaffolding, where we give students a toolbox of goodies. We talked about the CPA approach, the use of checklists, breaking it down in multiple steps, and also give students clear success criteria. We talked about engagement, this idea of bringing in movement, bringing in games, and the opportunity for students to work together, and then really dive into the students' interests. And then the last idea, the agency, to make sure we have a kind of a buffet for students to choose from of like manipulatives, and also like, you know, where can I start? Where's my entry point? And the power of sharing ideas and collaborating. And I feel like we at Awesomenicity, we're very much aware how much time all this takes when you have to plan all of your math lessons. And we felt like we wanted to provide teachers with kind of like this toolbox that you can just open up and magically it all appears and you can say it through your lesson and differentiate at the same time.
So for time purposes, we can skip through that slide, Fiona. We were just going to ask anyone if they have any takeaways. Feel free to write them in the chat if you feel confident. But we all know everyone's busy and you've got other things to go on to. So we'll move on to the end of the session. Thanks, Fiona.
No problem.
So we just want to say thank you. I think Kate and Hannah and I always get so excited when we can talk about math, but also in general, just to how to make learning fun and engaging for all learners. So thanks so much for joining our workshop today, this short webinar, and we hope to see you again somewhere online on this globe.
Thank you. So before, I know it's over an hour, but if some of you do have a couple more minutes, we would love for you to fill out an exit survey. And I've just copied the link in the chat right now. It takes literally 30 seconds to fill it. If you cannot, that's fine. We will send out a follow-up email as well. So first of all, a huge thank you to Awesomenicity, to Hannah and Eloise and Caitlin for presenting today. For me personally as well, I've been a primary teacher, I've taught math. For me, Awesomenicity is like a really fresh tool and resource for authentic learning that really helps you teach in an authentic way and connect with real life. And also, we also saw about like different learning needs and all of that. It's very like exciting and engaging as well. We do have some special discount codes specifically for Teacher Horizons members. We'll put all that in the follow-up email that we'll send along with the recording of the webinar as well. I also wanted to say that our community members already know this, but Teacher Horizons, you know, we're more than just a recruitment platform, which is why you can see that this webinar was a little bit different from recruitment. It was more focused on professional development and to help you become a better teacher and enjoy your teaching more specifically in math. So we hope that you found it valuable, and please do fill out the survey now if you can. And if you cannot, the link will be in the follow-up email that we'll send. Did I miss anything, Fiona?
No, I think you've covered everything.
Great. Well, thanks again to the presenters and for everyone attending today. Thank you, Fiona, as well, for hosting. So now we can carry on with our days.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everybody.
Thank you so much.